National Capital Area Chapter. Please join me. Name you heard before, our top fundraiser, Karl Kaufmann. Come on up, Karl.
All right, big crowd. My name is Karl Kaufmann, and I'm actually very excited to be doing the Goofy event this weekend, but that's not why I'm here to talk. I'm here because several years ago I was diagnosed with follicular lymphoma. Those of you that don't know, lymphoma is a blood cancer. If you're sitting at these tables, probably you've heard that a few times. But basically what that means is, at least in my case, there are certain types of cells that at one point went kind of haywire. For me, they're called B-cell lymphocytes. And that's about the last science you're going to hear from me up here, because I really can't explain a whole lot more than that. But what it boils down to is, at some point, one of those lymphocytes decided it wasn't going to function normally. That it will just keep reproducing itself, but that it won't kill itself. All of your cells are programmed to die at some point. But when you have a cancer, those cancers actually they lose their ability to kill themselves. And all the cells that it produces also, essentially, do not have the ability to kill themselves. And so you end up with all of these useless cells. They're damaged, they're useless, they're not performing any function, and what happens is eventually they crowd out your healthy cells, and at some point some folks will actually lose their battle. Now the type that I have is called an indolent lymphoma. There are two types of lymphoma. There's aggressive and there's indolent. Aggressive is sort of how it sounds. When you get diagnosed, chances are you're not in good shape at that point. When you get diagnosed, it might even be to the point where they won't let you leave the hospital that day, that you will start treatment right away. It might be that you get to go home and start treatment a couple days later. The treatment starts pretty much immediately. The good thing about aggressive lymphomas, if there is such a thing as a good thing, is that they can be cured. Depending on your health status, what type you have, things like that, how old you are, they can cure it maybe up to 70% of the time. If it doesn't, and you will find out quickly. If, after the treatments things aren't going so well, chances are that your life expectancy is not going to be particularly long. And just as a matter of coincidence, not a very good one, a woman I work with at work, her niece was diagnosed with an aggressive lymphoma when I was training, so I got to be a bit of a resource for my colleague to help explain what's going on and how things work. For me, I have an indolent lymphoma. Again, it is sort of how it sounds. When I was diagnosed, the doctor said, okay, you have follicular lymphoma. It's a slow-growing disease. You probably had it years ago. You didn't know. And you know what? You could have it several years more before you need treatment. But basically, when you start to show symptoms, we'll treat you. And I'll explain why I didn't show some symptoms right away. Now the downside about that is, although you get pretty good quality of life for a while and you have a decent life expectancy, the downside is there's not a cure. Okay? They can treat you, they can put you in remission, but chances are with an indolent lymphoma it's going to recur. And so eventually the treatments lose their effectiveness, and eventually a lot of folks will end up losing their battle with an indolent lymphoma because there is no cure, or at least no recognized cure out there today. So with me what happened was, several years ago, I started to have symptoms of jaundice. Your eyes get yellow. This was in the winter. As you can tell, I'm not a very tan person, but I was getting tan. There are other symptoms of jaundice that aren't polite to discuss in mixed company, certainly not while you're eating, so I won't. But suffice it to say, I knew that something was wrong. And I, like everybody else nowadays, I Googled it. And I was like, oh, I probably have gallstones. I probably ought to see a doctor. So I go see a doctor. The doctor said, yep, you probably have gallstones. Go get a sonogram. We'll find out where the gallstones are. And we'll get you out of here and you'll be done. Had the sonogram, no gallstones. At that point the doctor said, now I think we're going to need to admit you in the hospital, because if it's not gallstones, then we've got other problems and we're not really sure what could be causing them. So I went through a lot of tests, a lot of imaging, things like that. It wasn't particularly pleasant. And they really didn't know what was going on, but they knew that there was something that was essentially acting as a gallstone, essentially blocking up some of the internal plumbing in my body. and they needed to do some surgery, and they needed to do it sooner rather than later. Now, that surgery was 5 years ago today. In fact, at this moment, I was probably lying in the recovery room in intense pain. The surgery was pretty radical. I was out of work for about 6 weeks. I was in the hospital for 2 weeks. For those of you that are trying to think about doing something other than running to lose weight, I can recommend the surgery that I had. When I went into the hospital, I weighed probably about 205. 2 weeks later, I came out weighing 167. So I lost almost 40 pounds, which is what happens when you don't eat for 2 weeks. But it also is what happens when your body is trying frantically to repair itself from whatever the doctors just did. And so that was 5 years ago today. The first time I heard a doctor say that I had lymphoma is 5 years ago tomorrow. In fact, it will be about the exact time that start gun goes off when I start running that half marathon. I was lying in the ICU, sort of in a daze, and the doctors that do their rounds, and they do them at ungodly hours. You think that we have to get up early tomorrow and Sunday to run these races? I don't know when doctors sleep, because they come at all hours and they don't want you to get into sleep. And so I'm lying there, and there's a doctor outside my door explaining to, I guess, medical students my case. And he's outside my door. He has no idea whether I can hear him or not. I'm not sure whether he cared or not. But you know, when I went into surgery, I had no idea what was wrong with me, other than that there was something seriously wrong. When I came out, I don't recall anybody telling me anything. So the first time I was lucid was that morning, and I heard the doctor say that I had lymphoma, and that'll be 5 years ago tomorrow. And 5 years ago Sunday, I woke up the ICU.